Good morning. I'm delighted to be with you. My name is Lise Pellletier. I'm director of the Acadian Archives at the University of Maine at Fort Kent. And I'm here to talk to you about Acadians of northern Maine, particularly in the St. John Valley area. Acadians got their name from a piece of land actually in the New World that was given the name Arcadia by an Italian explorer named Giovanni di Verrazzano. Acadians started settling this land in 1604, first on St. Croix Island, which is now between New Brunswick and Maine, and then by moving to Port Royal in what is now Nova Scotia. They prospered very well, and in 1755, Acadians who'd been neutral either with the British authorities or the French authorities, were read a royal proclamation that stated that they were going to be removed from their lands. In fact, the deportation order started in 1755 and lasted for 7 years. Acadians were deported all over the American British colonies to the south, and some even went to England, to prisons in England. The reason for this is British governors of Nova Scotia and Massachusetts had always been at odds with the French Catholic Acadians. They did not believe their oath of neutrality and wanted the very rich lands for themselves and for British subjects. And so while the deportations were going on, the British soldiers burned the villages and burned all documents pertaining to deeds of land, burned churches, destroyed crops, etc. While the families were boarding, the members of the families were separated into different ships so that they could not be together once they arrived in their new home. In their new homes, they were slaves. They were kept in prisons. The intent was to destroy the culture, or to make it impossible to recreate a very, very tight community. In 1763, France and England signed a peace treaty called the Treaty of Paris. France had to cede all of its territories in the New World to England. Acadians, wherever they were in exile, asked for permission to come back to Acadia. It was, after all, their homeland. When they came back to the area of Nova Scotia, they found that the lands they had occupied were now in the hands of New England planters. And so they were not given many choices. They could go to different areas, but no more than 10 families. And so a lot of them decided to go to southwestern New Brunswick in an area that they called St. Anne, that is now Fredericton, New Brunswick. Here they hoped to have a permanent French Catholic settlement. And within the next 20 years, people who had escaped deportation by walking or fleeing to Quebec or other areas of Acadie joined them in St. Anne. But in 1784, at the end of the American Revolution, British soldiers or loyalist soldiers and their families came to the closest British colony, which was Canada. And they landed at the mouth of the St. John River, very close to the Acadian village, the new Acadian village. And at this point, Acadians realized that it would be nearly impossible for them to recreate their culture and to practice their religion and have a French Catholic priest. And so they asked permission to settle and gain lands in the Madawaska territory. The Madawaska territory started in Grand Falls, New Brunswick, and included all the lands north and south and to the west, up into what is now Quebec territory. And so the Acadians arrived and settled in the St. David, Saint Basile area on both sides of the St. John River in long lots. Long lots is the French way of cutting up lands because it gives them access, it gives everybody access to the St. John River. The St. John River was, of course, the highway. It also allowed Acadians and people from Halifax, let's say, to reach Quebec and Montreal. This was in 1785. Now, in 1820, Maine became a state, separating from Massachusetts. The southern border was well defined, but the northern border was not. And so there were claims made by the American government. The American government claimed the land that you see that's kind of an orange color. Those lands go into the Témiscouata area of Quebec. The British claimed lands into Maine at the level of Mars Hill. And the purple line that you see is actually where the boundary was decided, and it just so happens that the St. John River is the international boundary. The conflict of the border prompted that was called the Aroostook Bloodless War and prompted the construction of many forts. This is a picture of the fort in Fort Kent that is still standing. It is the original structure built in 1839. Here we have the same map, and now we look at it with different eyes because we know that the St. John River no longer links the families on both sides of it, but now divides it. All the families on the north shore of the St. John River from one day to the next were British subjects, and all the families and individuals on the south shore of the St. John River were now American citizens. Now, communications continued much the same way. This is 1842, after all, and Acadians continued to visit their families and do business in French, go to school in French, have their masses in French, etc., at the same time as they were embracing their new citizenship and becoming full-fledged Americans by participating in politics, etc. How is it that Acadians will continue to maintain their culture? There is French still spoken in the St. John Valley by older generations. French can be heard in all the towns of the St. John Valley, mostly by older people, 40 years and older. It's sad to realize that French is no longer taught in the elementary schools. It is taught as a foreign language at the high school level. And so the language is very much in danger of disappearing. One of the missions of the Acadian Archives is a celebration, preservation, and dissemination of everything that has to do with the history and culture of Acadians of the St. John Valley. There is another organization that is known as the Maine Acadian Heritage Council that also strives to keep the culture alive. For the last 5 years, our area, that is the St. John Valley in Maine, has worked with New Brunswick and Témiscouata and has hosted the Acadian World Congress in August of 2014. Now, it's very interesting that this collaboration helps cement relationships that had been formed for a number of years, but almost forgotten. The boundary, as we know, is not the same boundary as it was in 1842 when you could cross easily from one side to the other by jumping in a canoe. It's not the same world at all. But we are hoping that the hosting region of the Congrès Mondial Acadien 2014, that is the Acadia of the Lands and Forests, will become a tourism destination. And the links and collaborations that we are forging with our neighbors to the north, French-speaking neighbors to the north, will help Acadians of the St. John Valley maintain their culture.